time to go. At 15 after 8, we're heading to film school. Dr. Joe Fortunato joins us, film study professor. And Dr. Joe Fortunato takes us to film school. And today, gosh, with some of the weather that we have had, this is a movie that I imagine a lot more people are jumping on board as we're going back to 1996. And Joe, why don't you take the conversation from there? Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Ray. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, we're going back 30 years today to look back at the 30-year anniversary of the movie Twister, which was released in May of 1996, directed by Jan de Bont, and it was written by Michael Crichton and Anne-Marie Martin, stars Helen Hunt, Bill Paxton, Jamie Gertz, Carrie Elways, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Alan Ruck. It had 2 Oscar nominations, one for sound and one for visual effects. It was a big, big hit and kind of testament to the fact that they made a sequel here in the past year. When you make a sequel 30 years after the original, that's a movie that has some staying power, and this is definitely one of those movies. It was a big budget film for sure, had a budget of $92 million, but it was a big, big hit, as I said, grossing in the U.S. and Canada over $240 million, twice that worldwide. So big, big, big hit. Michael Crichton and his wife were paid $2 million for their script, which at the time was the single most expensive screenplay ever purchased. And Twister had been floating around the industry for several years and was a very sought-after project before moving into production. Before Jan de Bont was hired to direct, Steven Spielberg, Robert Zemeckis, Tim Burton, John Carpenter, James Cameron were all considered or approached or even attached at one point or another to direct the film. Spielberg eventually did serve as executive producer instead, but the directing duties went to Jan de Bont. And he wanted to do this film because he thought this might be the last chance that he could do a big budget, effects movie with practical effects. And if you don't know what I mean, that's a term we use in the movie industry, which means kind of not CGI. This was very much at the dawn of CGI. Practical effects means it happens on set. So real explosions, real, blood capsules, things like that. And so that was one of the reasons he wanted to do this, because he wanted to take on that challenge. I mentioned it stars Bill Paxton, or co-stars Bill Paxton. Well, Paxton died in 2017, as a lot of people know. And the spotter network that was sort of highlighted in the film, these are real storm chasers. They have about 200 storm chasers, and they spelled out BP for Bill Paxton with their GPS trackers on the radar display as sort of an ode to him, which had been done 5 times before, but had never been done for a quote-unquote civilian. It was just an honor for storm chasers, but the late Bill Paxton got that. I talked about the sound. This is a very loud, very bass-heavy surround channel. The film was notorious for destroying surround speakers in theaters worldwide. In fact, Prince of Twister included a note to the projectionist from director Jan de Bont to turn up the volume for maximum effect. So in some instances, this resulted in those blown speakers, as well as complaints from various patrons that it might be a little bit too loud.
It's interesting, and I want you to go further down the road of effects, because I remember watching this movie and the tornado coming through and the things flying through the air and the car that flies in front of you. I mean, I was on the edge of my seat with the effects that they put together for this movie, and, I thought really that carried this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned it was nominated for an Oscar for sound, and this is a movie that relies heavily on sound. Some interesting sound effects. A recording of a camel's moan was slowed down and used as the sound of a tornado, and a jet engine from a Boeing 707 was used to generate wind in some of the scenes as well. This was filmed in Oklahoma. In the real town of Wakita, Oklahoma, the production company bought about 30 homes that they could just use to destroy for the production. So they basically bought a whole neighborhood. And then the town was rebuilt after in that downtown area, and they got a new town and a new fire truck to use in the city. Talk about casting, we haven't talked about that. Laura Dern and Tom Hanks were considered for the roles of Dr. Joe and Bill Harding, which eventually went to our two leads. A number of other people whose names were considered: Kevin Costner, Richard Gere, John Travolta, Mel Gibson, Dennis Quaid were all considered for the Bill Harding role that went to Bill Paxton. As I mentioned, Tom Hanks was the original choice, and he was working with Bill Paxton on Apollo 13. And when he declined the movie, he sort of recommended Paxton for the film. And that's kind of how Paxton got into the mix. Jan de Bont didn't really want to work with famous actors because not only their notoriously demanding nature, but he wanted lesser known actors not to draw attention away from the tornadoes, which is kind of a weird thing to say when you think about it. But he cast Helen Hunt, who was not really a movie star at the time, although she was a TV star. So, that was her big claim to fame. A couple of people that were up for some of those roles: Mira Sorvino was considered to play Melissa Reeves, which was the love interest, the girlfriend of Bill Harding. And Jamie Gertz eventually got that as well. She had to dye her hair brown for the part. Or I'm sorry, Sorvino didn't want to dye her hair brown, so she turned it down, and that went to Jamie Gertz, who had dark hair. Some other fun casting for the role of Dustin that eventually went to Philip Seymour Hoffman: Garth Brooks, Mark Cuban, and Chris Farley. So that was pretty much an open casting call for that role as well.
Yes, the movie Twister, Joe, about 2 years ago, Helen Hunt was doing a tour around the country, talking about the movie when the remake was done. And she joined me on the morning show. She told me that that's one of her most memorable things in acting was doing the movie Twister. And I said to her, did you realize at the time that you were doing something special? And she said, yeah, we really did realize that this was going to be big.
Oh, that's a great story. Just to kind of put another capper on the production stories. In the film, there's these devices, these weather devices, and they're nicknamed Dorothy. And that is, of course, an homage to Dorothy Gale, who is the heroine of Wizard of Oz, who famously was caught up in a twister herself. And then the production went through countless cans of hairspray to keep the actor's hair modeled the way they want it to be, with all the wind flying around from the tornadoes.
Yeah, it's a great flick. It's probably been some time since all of us have seen it. Sometimes it's up on some of the networks and stuff. But when Joe said, hey, I want to do Twister with the anniversary, it's a real good movie. I remember going to the theaters to see it, and it's a good pick by Joe today. Joe,
just don't blow your speakers if you go watching it this weekend. So
That's right. Hey, anything else for us you'd like to pass on to the listeners this morning, Joe?
I just always encourage everyone to go to my website, joefortunato.net, to see what's going on. Don't have anything coming up in the immediate few weeks, but we will have some things coming up as the summer kind of gets closer, and you'll want to check out joefortunato.net to find out what's going on, events you can attend, or content that you can get right online.
Sounds terrific. Joe, great job again, as always, my friend. We'll do it again next week.
I look forward to it. See you then.
You got it. Dr. Joe Fortunato with us on Film School each and every Friday right here on the morning show, 93.5, 1590 WAKR.